My son-in-law helped me set up the app on a Sunday afternoon. He said it would make everything easier. 3 weeks later, my granddaughter sat across from me at my kitchen table, her face completely white, and said, "Grandpa, we need to call the RCMP." I didn't believe her at first. I told her she was overreacting. I was wrong. Let me back up. My name is Howard. I'm 68 years old. I spent 31 years working for the city of Edmonton. Parks and infrastructure, nothing glamorous, but steady work, honest work. My wife, June, passed 4 years ago from pancreatic cancer. It was fast. 11 weeks from diagnosis to the end. After that, it was just me in our house on 82nd Avenue, the same house we'd bought in 1989 when the market was soft and we thought we were the luckiest people alive. My daughter is Ingrid. She's 41. She lives about 20 minutes away in Sherwood Park with her husband, Marcus, and their 2 kids. My granddaughter, Claire, is 19. She just finished her first year at NAIT studying cybersecurity and NAIT, studying cybersecurity and NETIC studying cybersecurity and network administration. My grandson, Theo, is 15 and mostly interested in hockey. Ingrid and I have always been close. After June died, she called me every day for the first year. Every single day. Sometimes twice. She'd bring dinner on Sundays, lasagna or chicken, whatever she'd made for their family. I looked forward to those Sundays more than I wanted to admit. Marcus, I never warmed to completely. He's not a bad person. He works in commercial real estate, and he has that quality some salespeople have. Friendly on the surface, always slightly angled toward something. I never said anything to Ingrid about it. It wasn't my place. The trouble started, though I didn't know it at the time, on a Sunday in February. It was cold. One of those Edmonton February days where the temperature drops to -28 and the city just hunkers down and waits. Ingrid had come for dinner with Marcus and both kids. After we ate, Marcus offered to help me with my finances. I hadn't asked for help. I want to be clear about that. He said he'd noticed I was still doing everything by paper. Writing checks, driving to the TD branch on White Avenue, keeping a ledger in a green notebook the way my father had taught me. He wasn't wrong. I don't love online banking. June had handled most of it anyway, and after she died, I just kept doing what she'd shown me. The old way. Marcus said there was an app that would make everything simpler. He'd use it himself. It consolidated all your accounts, checking, savings, my pension payments from the city, my RRSP, into one dashboard. You could see everything in one place, set up automatic bill payments, track your spending. He made it sound like something the bank itself would recommend. He set it up on my phone, right there at the kitchen table. He asked for my TD login, my username and password. Told me to look away for a moment while he entered them for security reasons, then handed the phone back. The app looked clean, professional. It showed my balances. He walked me through it for about 10 minutes. "You're all set," he said. Claire was sitting at the far end of the table doing something on her laptop. She looked up once while Marcus was talking, just briefly, and then looked back down. I didn't think anything of it. For the first 2 weeks, the app seemed fine. I checked it most mornings with my coffee. I could see my pension deposit come in on the 15th, watch my hydro and property tax payments go out, see my grocery spending. It felt, honestly, a little like a toy, unnecessary, but harmless. Then, in the 3rd week, I got a notification I didn't understand. It said a transfer of $800 had been made to an account I didn't recognize. The reference code was a string of numbers and letters that meant nothing to me. I opened the app and the transfer wasn't there. The balance looked normal. I assumed I'd misread the notification. I was half asleep when I saw it, first thing in the morning. I put my phone down and made toast. 2 days later, another notification. $1,200. Same type of reference code. Again, when I opened the app, nothing. Balance looked right. I called TD directly that afternoon. Not to the app, but the number on the back of my card. The woman I spoke to pulled up my account and read me the last 10 transactions. Both transfers were there. $800 on the 14th. $1,200 on the 16th. I said I didn't make those. She put me on hold for 4 minutes. When she came back, she said the transfers had been authorized through a linked third-party application and that she could flag them for investigation, but that the authorization codes matched, which complicated things. She suggested I come into the branch. I wrote down everything she told me in my green notebook. That night, I called Ingrid. I told her what I'd found. There was a pause on her end that lasted a little longer than I expected. She said, "Dad, are you sure you didn't do it accidentally? The app can be confusing at first." I said I was sure. She said she'd asked Marcus to look into it. Marcus called me the next morning. Very calm, very reasonable. He said he'd looked at the app's activity log, and he thought I probably triggered an automatic transfer by tapping something in the interface. He said he'd reset the settings so it wouldn't happen again. He offered to come over and walk me through it. I thanked him. Something in my stomach felt wrong, but I thanked him. I didn't cancel the app. That was my mistake. I should have deleted it right then, driven to the branch, changed every password, done what the TD woman had suggested. But Marcus sounded so reasonable, and Ingrid trusted him. And I didn't want to be the old man who caused a family problem over something he probably didn't understand properly. I went back to checking the app every morning. 3 days later, Claire showed up at my door unannounced. It was a Tuesday. She had her backpack on, and she looked like she hadn't slept. I let her in and made tea. She sat at the kitchen table, the same spot she'd sat at when Marcus had set up the app, and she put her laptop open in front of her. She said, "Grandpa, can I look at your phone?" I handed it to her. She plugged it into a cable she pulled from her bag. She opened something on her laptop. Green text on a black background. I watched her face. She didn't say anything for a long time, maybe 5 minutes. Then she sat back. She said, "This app isn't what he told you it was." I asked her what she meant. She turned the laptop so I could see it. She explained it slowly, in plain English, because she knows me. The app Marcus had installed had a remote access component built into its back end. It wasn't malware in the traditional sense. It wasn't something you catch with a standard antivirus. It was a legitimate app framework with a secondary function that, once you authorize it with real banking credentials, allowed someone with the right access code to view your accounts, initiate transfers up to a daily limit, and receive notifications of your activity while showing you a clean, normal-looking dashboard. She'd seen something like it in one of her courses. Not this exact app, but the architecture. I sat there. I looked at my kitchen. The yellow curtains June had picked out. The photograph on the fridge of me and Theo at an Oilers game. I felt something I can only describe as the floor going soft under me. Not quite nausea, not quite dizziness, just a sudden awareness that the world was slightly different than I'd believed it was 10 minutes ago. I asked her how much was gone. She connected directly to TD through the bank's own secure portal, not the app. She logged in with my credentials and pulled the full transaction history for the past 3 weeks. $4,600. I'd worked for the city of Edmonton for 31 years. June and I had raised Ingrid in that house on 82nd Avenue. I'd put money away carefully, every month, for decades, because neither of us came from families with money, and we knew what it was to have nothing. $4,600 wasn't going to ruin me. But it wasn't about the amount. It was Marcus's voice on the phone saying probably triggered it by accident. It was Ingrid's pause before she told me I must have been confused. I asked Claire if she was certain. She said yes. She said she'd known something was wrong the night Marcus set it up, but she hadn't been sure enough to say anything, and she'd spent the past week confirming it. I asked her what we should do. She said, "We call the RCMP, and we call TD Fraud Division, and you do not touch that app again." I nodded. She made the calls herself, sitting right there at my kitchen table, because her voice didn't shake the way mine would have. We went to the TD branch on White Avenue that afternoon. The branch manager, a young woman named, I'll just call her the manager, pulled up my full account history and flagged every transaction associated with the third-party authorization. She was professional and she moved quickly. She didn't question my account of what had happened. She initiated a fraud investigation on the spot and issued me new credentials immediately. She also told me something I hadn't known. There had been 2 failed transfer attempts before the successful ones, both blocked by TD's own fraud detection system. The amounts had been larger. One was for $3,000, one was for $4,500. The successful ones, the smaller ones, had slipped through because they fell under the threshold that triggered automatic review. Marcus had been testing the limits. I sat in that branch chair, and I thought about every Sunday dinner. I thought about how he'd refilled my coffee that night without being asked, how he'd joked with Theo about the Oilers, how he'd hugged Ingrid when she put on her coat to leave. I thought about whether Ingrid knew. I didn't know the answer to that yet. The RCMP officer who came to my house 2 days later was thorough. He took the phone, took screenshots of the app's metadata that Claire had documented, took my statement, and took the TD fraud report. He explained that this type of case fell under financial fraud and unauthorized use of a computer system. He was careful not to tell me what the outcome would be, but he said the evidence Claire had documented was detailed and that it would be reviewed seriously. I asked him, carefully, whether it was possible my daughter was involved. He said that would be part of the investigation. I went to bed that night, and I lay awake until about 3 in the morning. I thought about June. I thought about what she would have said. She would have been devastated about Ingrid, but she would have gotten up the next morning and made coffee and dealt with what was real, not what she wished was true. That's who she was. I got up and made coffee at 3:15. In the following weeks, the picture came clearer. Piece by piece, Marcus had gambling debts. I learned this not from the RCMP, but from Claire, who had learned it from Theo, who had overheard arguments at home that he hadn't understood at the time. Marcus owed money, significant money, to people Ingrid didn't know about. He had been managing it quietly for over a year, moving things around using commission advances from his brokerage. He'd run out of room. Ingrid did not know about the app. That took me time to believe, and I'm not certain I believed it fully until I sat with her in my living room about 3 weeks after the RCMP visit, just the two of us, and watched her cry in a way I hadn't seen since she was a child. She said she hadn't known. She said Marcus had told her he was just helping her father with a budgeting tool. She said she should have looked more closely. I don't know exactly what she knew or when. Maybe I never will. But I know my daughter, and the grief on her face that day wasn't performance. She filed for separation 6 weeks after the investigation began. The RCMP laid charges against Marcus 4 months later. Fraud over $5,000. The total, once they traced additional transfers to an account linked to his business, came to $9,200. Unauthorized use of a computer system. The charge sheet was 2 pages. I was in the kitchen when Claire called me to tell me. It was a Tuesday morning early, and I was standing at the stove making oatmeal. She said, "Grandpa, they charged him." I put down my spoon. I looked out the window at the backyard, the old birch tree June had planted. The garden beds had been too tired to maintain properly since she died. I said, "Okay." She said, "Are you okay?" I said, "I think so." And I was. Not because it didn't hurt. It hurt a great deal, the whole thing. Not the money, but what the money represented. The calculation behind it. The Sunday dinners. The way he'd said, "You're all set," and handed me back my phone. But Claire had caught it. 19 years old. First year of school. And she'd known something was wrong, and she'd taken her time to be certain before she said a word. And then she'd sat at my kitchen table and made the calls. After June died, I used to wonder sometimes what I was still doing here. Not in a dark way. Just the ordinary loneliness of a man who had built his life around a person who was no longer in it. The house felt large. The Sundays felt long. They don't feel that way anymore. Claire came over last weekend. She brought coffee from the Tim Hortons on the corner. Double for me, same as always. And we sat in the kitchen for 2 hours, talking about nothing in particular. Her courses. The Oilers' chances. Whether I should finally fix the back fence. Before she left, she looked at my phone and updated the operating system, deleted 4 apps she said I didn't need, and showed me how to check which permissions any new app was requesting before I agreed to anything. I took notes in my green notebook. She laughed at me for that, but she didn't tell me to stop. I still think about the moment Marcus handed me back my phone and said, "You're all set." He said it the way you'd say it to someone who needed help crossing the street. Cheerful. Patient. And I thanked him. That's the part I've had the hardest time sitting with. Not the money, not even the betrayal, but the thank you. I thanked the man who had just handed me back a loaded trap. I don't say that to punish myself. I say it because I think it matters to be honest about how these things happen. They don't happen because someone is foolish. They happen because someone is trusting, and trust is not a flaw. Marcus understood that. He used it deliberately, carefully, over Sunday dinners and small kindnesses, until the trust was deep enough to hold his weight. That's not my failure. That's his. What I keep coming back to is Claire. Not just what she did, but how she did it. She noticed something wrong the night it happened. She was 19 years old, sitting at the end of my kitchen table, and she saw something in Marcus's movements that didn't sit right. But she didn't say anything yet. She went home, and she spent a week making sure she was right before she brought it to me. That kind of steadiness, the willingness to do the hard, careful work before you speak, that's not something you're born with. That's something you build, course by course, choice by choice. I watched her sit at my table with her laptop and her cables and her green text terminal, and I thought, June would have loved this kid. There's a version of this story where Claire says nothing, where she second-guesses herself, tells herself she's probably wrong, doesn't want to cause a family problem. I've thought about that version. It scares me more than anything Marcus did, because the damage Marcus did was real, but it was countable. $9,200, a charge sheet, 2 pages long. A marriage that ended. Those things have edges. The damage that comes from looking the other way, from choosing comfort over honesty, that damage doesn't have edges. It just spreads. I think about integrity a lot differently now than I did before this happened. I used to think of it as something you demonstrated in big moments. Whether you'd lie under oath, whether you'd steal if no one was watching, I don't think that anymore. I think integrity is mostly about the small, private decisions, whether you look closely at something that makes you uneasy, even when looking closely is inconvenient. Whether you tell the truth to someone you love when the truth is going to hurt them. Whether you do the unglamorous, painstaking work of being certain before you act. Claire did all three. She looked closely. She told me the truth. She did the work. Marcus did none of them. And I think he'd been making that choice, the easier, quieter choice, for so long that by the time he sat at my kitchen table and handed me back my phone, he didn't even experience it as a choice anymore. That's how character erodes. Not in one dramatic moment, but in 100 small ones, each one a little easier than the last. I'm 68. I have my green notebook and my birch tree and my double-double from Tim Hortons on Sunday mornings. I have Ingrid, who is rebuilding her life with a steadiness that reminds me of her mother. I have Theo, who still talks to me about the Oilers, even when they break our hearts. And I have Claire, who updated my phone last weekend and showed me how to check app permissions and laughed at me for taking notes. I took notes anyway.